What is a supernatural event that happened in your life that just cannot be explained? One night I had a dream about my grandpa, who had died almost 20 years prior. We were in his home, and he kept telling me we need to clean the house, we need to get the house ready. When I asked him why, he just said she's coming home. My grandma, his wife of 50 years, died the next day.
A family friend of ours, Gary, was terminally ill with cancer. He was a father figure to me and one of the few adult males from my previous life. I am a recovering alcoholic, that fully understood me. A friend and myself were in Moab, UT and found a hostel to sleep in for the night. I had a dream about Gary. He looked amazing, completely healthy and backlit and was wearing a multicolored sweater. He looked at me with concern in his eyes, pointed backwards and said, "I'm not doing too good." I woke up a bit shaken because it felt surreal. I told my girlfriend about the dream and she asked if I needed to call my mom to see how he was doing. I told her that it wasn't necessary because I knew they would call me if Gary passed. That day we drove from Utah to Colorado and stayed in another hotel. About 5 a.m. I woke up and my phone was ringing. I could see that it was my mom and I already knew what she was going to tell me. She broke the news that Gary had passed and I basically explained to her that Gary came and told me goodbye. I'm tearing up IRL right now writing this. The picture that his wife picked for his obituary was Gary in that multicolored sweater he was wearing when he came to me in my dream.
Had a premonition I'd be involved in a car accident one morning on the way to work as I got out of bed. It was a very strange thought and I considered taking an alternate route but did not. As I got onto the highway it was raining and a car flew past me, hydroplaned, and slammed into my car.
Working as night security for a small office at a sanitation plant. Building was a single entrance and you had to check in at the security station to get in or out. A worker shows up and checks in saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check in his ID and flip a few lights for him, then go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back. So I go patrol the building to find him and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas I turned lights on for him. No other lights are on, and he's not in any other rooms. I stop by security to see if we just missed each other and he's trying to leave, but nobody is there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point I went to check cameras to see where he went, but he's not on a single camera except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the next camera down said hall. At this point I logged it as an incident, and GTFO right as the relief shift showed up. Next day my boss calls me and says that worker had been on vacation out of state for several days, and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation to what happened.
The only way I can explain this one is wishful thinking. My mom and dad were codependent, and they liked it that way. They didn't want other people, other than the kids. They were completely happy to be just wrapped up in each other. My dad died the day before his birthday in a hospice center. Afterwards, it was like he was still home. His touch lamp beside his recliner would go on by itself. The recliner would rock like someone was getting in it. And sometimes, my mom or my sister would hear my dad saying, "Honey, fix me a cold drink?" That was exactly how he'd ask my mom to fill up his massive mug with Sprite over ice. My mother died less than a year and a half later. After my mother died, there was never another sign of either of them being there. They've been gone now for close to 14 years now.
When I was a kid, about 10 to 12-ish, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs home alone while Mom was out doing errands. We have this weird carpet runner over our hardwood stairs that's only really attached at the top of the flight but otherwise not fitted or secured to each individual stair. So naturally I step on an air bubble of carpet with my vision obscured by the laundry and fall backwards while bear hugging a bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking, well, guess I'm about to die, while almost airborne with just my big toe left on the carpet when I felt two hands, one on either side of my shoulder blades, give me a firm shove that launched me back up on the step and diagonally against the stair rail. I assumed Mom somehow silently came back early without announcing herself and turned around to thank her while still clinging to the railing, but no one was there. I scurried upstairs to put my things down while calling her name and walked the house afterwards to check if any doors were unlocked or if her car was there. I finally resorted to calling her cell, where she told me she was hitting up a few more stores. It still feels like there's a presence on that stairwell, like someone's watching, but in a protective way rather than sinisterly. Thanks for all the awards. I'll have to holler to the stairway ghost and let it know the internet loves it.
When I was 9 or 10, it was a bad year. I was regularly physically and emotionally abused. But that year, I was sexually abused. On top of all that, I started having serious mental health issues. Well, when things were at their absolute worst, I started having dreams of this blonde lady telling me to hold on. That things would get better. It was so comforting and peaceful, and continued as long as the extreme abuse continued. I didn't know who she was, I just figured I imagined her. Well, things finally simmer down, and the dreams stop. About a year later, Mom was going through old photo albums, and my blood freezes. I see the blonde woman from my dreams. I ask who she is. Turns out, it was an aunt I had who died shortly before I was born. Edit, holy hell, thank you everyone for the kindness you all have shown. I'm tearing up. I didn't expect that. I'm almost 40 now, it was a long time ago. I still have scars, but I was lucky enough to get therapy when I got free from my family. Things aren't great, but they're much improved and I have no complaints, and that's enough for me. Thank you all.
I was about 15 and trying to sleep but having an asthma attack. Late in the night I started hearing a rhythmic breathing from the floor next to the bed. It wasn't scary, more comforting. And it wasn't me, because my breathing sounded way more beep up than that. It helped me calm down and get to sleep. Even though I was still sick, I was able to get my hands on an inhaler in the morning. At the time I thought it was a friendly ghost. I later rationalized that maybe I was hearing a family member through the heating ducts. What I realized years later, when I had a dog, was that it had sounded exactly like a big dog sleeping next to the bed. So now I'm 50-50 on whether a ghost dog came to visit me, or my own dog time traveled back about 10 years before she was born to comfort me.
Woke up one in the middle of the night to a man standing next to the bed staring at my so. He was slightly translucent and I figured it was just another sleep paralysis episode. Had them before, so knew the drill, and rolled over and went to go back to sleep. Normally being able to move isn't part of sleep paralysis, and immediately my heart began to race as I realized I need to roll over and check what I saw. Person was still standing there, staring at my so, then he made eye contact with me. Stared at me for a while before turning around and walking to the wall, slowly fading away with each step. Next morning so wakes up looking like beep and said she had the worst night's sleep because she kept having the feeling that someone was watching her. Glad we no longer live in that house.
I had a dream once about my high school best friend who had moved out of state and started a family. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in at least 10 years and had never met her child, except seeing pictures/posts on Facebook and commenting on them. In my dream I was walking down a street at night and out of nowhere her little girl appears next to me and I asked her, "Where's your mama? Why are you by yourself?" I remember her taking me to some bushes near a random house on the street and finding my friend in bad shape, beaten up or something, on the ground, and I remember running to the door of the random house screaming for help and to call the police. This is all I can recall from the dream, but I think there may have been a little more. The next day, I wake up and think to myself, man, that was weird. Maybe I dreamt of her because we had just spoken a little in comments of a Facebook post. I should send her a message. I go on about my day, go to work, get home later that day and sit on my couch and scroll through Facebook. Bam! 1,000 posts, rest in peace, etc., all of them tagged my friend and her daughter. I thought, what in the actual FCK? At that point there was no information as to what had happened, so I thought it must have been a car accident or something. Over the course of the next few weeks to months, more and more information came out and it was not an accident. My friend and her sweet baby had been murdered by some animal. I won't refer to them as a person. This happened about 5 years ago. I still remember the main parts of the dream vividly. I still am a little horrified that I had this dream that night. When it was happening, possibly. I haven't been able to tell anyone else about it either because just thinking about it gives me chills.
Not scary but still not explainable. When I was 22, I visited my grandma in her retirement home at Christmas. She was well, nothing out of the ordinary. A few days later I traveled to my then boyfriend across the country. 2 days after New Year's I woke up at 2 a.m. crying. And I just couldn't stop. I wasn't really sad or overly emotional, but the tears just kept streaming down my face. Nothing like that ever happened and I was kind of confused, as was my BF. I fell back asleep a few hours later. 3 days later I was informed that my grandma had died that night at about 2 a.m. Due to the divorce of my parents, communication was difficult, and we were only informed after the funeral. I don't believe in anything supernatural, but it's hard to wrap my head around, especially since nothing like this ever happened again.
I've had extremely vivid dreams of relatively inconsequential moments in my future life that I nonetheless keep locked away in a little corner of my head, and then when those moments actually occur, I get insane déjà vu that throws me off until I remember the dreams. It's a very bizarre thing, but it ultimately doesn't mean much to me. An edit since this seems to have blown up. Thank you everyone for sharing your similar experiences with this. And also thank you to those of you attempting to explain what could be going on when the events occur, no matter your stance on it. It's fascinating reading some of the details on what might cause it, or whether it's just some trick of the mind. It's very informative.
I had a sort of demonic mask on my shelf, and one day while I was working at my desk no more than 4 feet away from it, it just flew off the shelf and shattered on the floor. It didn't just fall off the shelf, it was like someone threw it across the room. The baffling part to me is that I am the one who made the mask. So I know it's not cursed by some voodoo hex or something.
Super minor compared to many in this thread. Night before Thanksgiving 3 years ago, I was across the country at my parents', driving back to theirs with my now wife from a friend's house. As we draw near, there is some type of bundle in the middle of the road. I stopped and pulled off to move it, and it turned out to be a barred owl that got clipped by a car. Long story short, I spent the rest of that night getting the owl into a puppy cage, gave it some food and water, and the next day dropped it off at a wildlife rescue center. I got home the next week, all the way across the country, New Jersey to Oregon. I stepped outside and there was a barred owl sitting on my fence watching me. It was gone by the time I got back. But now I know I'm straight with all owls.
Was in college walking to class. Went to cross a busy street and a hand grabbed my shoulder, quite hard, and stopped me. A car zoomed by that would have killed me. Nobody was behind me or anywhere close enough to have stopped me. Guardian angel?
When I was going to my family's home, I got in a SUV going down the road. This was in Bangladesh at the time, and after taking the SUV, the next 2 hours would be a highway going down a forest. I was sitting shotgun, and along the highway there was an old man walking down the highway. He was hitchhiking and the driver decided to pick him up. He insisted on sitting in my seat and obliged as he was an older man. About an hour down the drive, our car collided with a bus and the shotgun seat was mangled up. We all got out and we looked around, but we couldn't find the old man that insisted on taking my seat anywhere. Stories like these aren't rare, but I didn't believe them. We all know the man sat in my seat and we all saw him. But he was nowhere to be found. Edit. He just vanished. No blood. He was wearing ethnic attire which isn't peculiar around that area. He didn't speak at all, and we didn't ask him anything either. He just said to drop him off at the market ahead, which would be in the town my house was in. One thing that was weird was that he spoke in an oldish Bengali. Like a old Bengali that we'd see in poetry from the 1800s. I didn't see it as peculiar cuz he seemed like an ascetic. Second edit. I have pics of the collision if you guys were wondering. Third edit. When I said he didn't speak at all, I meant during the ride. He didn't say anything other than where he wanted to go and insisting on my seat.
There's a story from when I was 4 to 5 years old. My grandmother was looking through old family photos and asking me who the people were. We got to a picture of my grandfather, and she asked me who he was, and I said, Poppy Jim. He died suddenly at home when my mother was 10, in the same house we lived in, so I never met him. She asked me how I knew that. I told her, oh, he comes and tucks me in and tells me he loves me sometimes after you go to bed.
My siblings and I all had the same dream on the same night a year ago. It was exactly 1 year after my mum died, and we all had a dream about her, and she was in the same place and was speaking to us. She reassured us that she was okay and she was with her mum and my dead siblings, and that her dad is in the bad place. The next day we all realized we had the same dream. We even all independently drew a picture of the place we saw her and wrote down the name of the place it resembled. Most of my siblings took that as an actual message from my mum, but my youngest sister and I like to believe that we have all developed some freaky hive mind low-level telepathy lol.
Many years ago, my parents had separated and my father was planning on taking a trip across the country to California. He was pretty excited about it. I talk to him the day before he's leaving, wish him well and tell him I'll talk to him after he gets to California. The day of his trip, he calls me and tells me he decided last minute not to go. Refuses to really get into why. Just says he changed his mind. Seemed really odd for something that he had been planning for a couple months. That night I'm sitting at my girlfriend's house and we're watching the news, and they report that US Air Flight 1493, the flight my dad was supposed to be on, collided with another aircraft while landing in Los Angeles. About 25% of the people on the flight were killed. Hard to know how my dad would have made out, because it really depended on where you were sitting, front versus back of the plane. It was several months before he finally told me that night before he was supposed to leave. He had an extremely vivid dream that he died in a fiery plane crash. So vivid that it scared him out of flying that day. My dad is a Marine Corps Vietnam veteran who saw combat. I can only imagine how vivid the dream must have been, to scare him out of getting on that plane that morning. Edit. Believe it or not, I've never actually watched Final Destination. Now I have to see it.
When I was 12, I woke up with a start at 2:30 in the morning. I wasn't dreaming and didn't know why I woke up. My parents told me the next morning that my grandfather had had a heart attack and went for emergency surgery. He died at 2:30 in the morning.
Very minor, but I still go what the beep when I remember. When I was a kid, around 6, I lived in a very arid area, and a wide field of red dirt was between my house and my buds. Every day, walking over there, when I got about halfway across, I'd pick up a dirt clod or a small rock, and toss it behind me over my shoulder. About 10 seconds later, it would come flying back over my head and land in front of me. I'd just grin and keep walking. I remember this really distinctly, even trying to replicate it later in childhood after I'd moved away, and being sad that it didn't work anymore. Didn't question it as a kid, but looking back, just really weird. Also, my job site is haunted, but this seems stranger.
My dad was a painter who passed away of cancer. Before he died, he talked about God letting him paint the skies. The day he died, there was a giant pink cloud that looked just like an angel. Edit. Here is a picture of the cloud.
May your day be filled with joy and happiness. And please remember to subscribe to Upvote for the best quality content every day.